Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
So when some of the details started coming in about the trial of Denis Coulson and his two co-defendants, it was actually so graphic that we had to have a discussion whether it was even publishable. Denis Coulson, of course, a former Irish under-20s rugby star who's currently serving a 14-year sentence for rape in France. We believe he's due up soon, hoping to get bail while he awaits an appeal against that sentence, Eamon.
Yeah, it was reported in some of the French press that Coulson and the two other men that were convicted of rape as well, there will be kind of a release hearing, because they've all obviously appealed the sentences, and there was two of them got 14 years, including Denis Coulson, and one of them got I think a 12-year sentence. So, like certainly from the reaction of the lawyers in December, it seemed to be, even by French standards, quite a stiff sentence they got for what they were trying to argue was an historic offence at this point in 2017, although I'm sure the victim had a very different viewpoint in that. It was an unusual case, kind of watching it from this distance, because although the victim had a request granted that it be held behind closed doors, it wasn't in camera as we would understand it here. Yeah. And so what you had was the press weren't allowed in for her, for the part where she was being questioned as well. She was being cross-examined by the defence lawyers, and she was also, recounting, what happened to her in 2017 after, I think, Grenoble had played Bordeaux-Bègles, and the five men were players with Grenoble at the time. Now, when I say five, there was three convicted of rape. There was two others, and including another full Irish international rugby player, Chris Farrell, who was convicted of failing to intervene in a crime, which doesn't have an equivalent here. Now, he's not going to be doing any time in prison, and he'd effectively be wearing a bracelet for the next 2 years on his ankle. And both himself and another guy who got a lesser sentence, again, Dillon Hayes, another New Zealander professional rugby player, they're neither of those are going to apply. They're not going to be doing any jail time. So I guess that rather than face going back to court and letting this drag on again and have it hang over them, they've obviously decided to cut their losses at this point and try to move on, I suppose, from their point of view. But the guys who are serving a long sentence, they're looking at trying to appeal and overturn it. And they feel quite aggrieved to some extent, according to all their lawyers. Which, brings me back to what I was saying about how we were trying to we're looking at the trial, although it was behind closed doors, it wasn't in camera. And so the lawyers are coming out every day. This is over 2 weeks, and kind of explaining to the waiting media what had been happening and who was saying what. But you're getting a very, I suppose, a biased interpretation of what went on, because it was mostly the defence lawyers, although the victim's lawyer and the prosecution also made statements to the press coming out of court and trying to say, this is what happened in court. Yeah, I mean, it's a very different legal system, again, to what we're used to. It's the victims are able to bring prosecutions in France. Rather than get into all of that, because we probably get it wrong and not fully understand it, but it is definitely a very, very different system, and some of which we will have been aware of in Dean Bailey case, for example, who was prosecuted in France without being there. Also in France, I think if you look at Nicolas Sarkozy is up this week, but that case has also run on for a long time, and at some point he was found guilty and was allowed out on a lengthy while an appeal occurred. So there is very different systems. Now, to go back to the actual evidence, I mean, the evidence was particularly graphic, but it basically what happened in 2017 was these rugby players are out on a night out after the match. They came across, this woman? She ended up back in a hotel room with them, and then she was subjected to a very, very violent attack. Yeah, well, it was a certain amount of the evidence, from what we're told, from what we've read in the French media and what's been reported, was that there was a video found on Denis Coulson's phone which showed I suppose various objects being inserted, and that while she appeared awake and a willing partner, which was an argument being used by their defence. The prosecution more or less said, look, she was basically in an alcohol coma, that she'd been out in a bar, had met these professional rugby players who'd been out celebrating. They'd gone back to a nightclub, had more drink, and then ended up in this hotel room. And only thing she remembers is waking up and finding herself surrounded by naked men. And one of those who didn't take part in the rape was Chris Farrell. He wasn't even actually in the bar or the nightclub because he had broken his ankle that day, and his defence was saying, how could he make a decision on whether or not this woman was consenting, and that he was actually full of tramadol, painkillers, having suffered the broken bones in his foot. And they were making, that was the defence from his point of view, although he's not appealing it.
Yeah.
Whereas Denis Coulson then, was kind of seen as, I suppose, as the main perpetrator. Although there were three of them that were ultimately convicted of rape. The others were New Zealander Rory Grice and a French player as well, Loic James. So they were the guys that were got the lengthy sentences, and they're all going to be appealing. So we're going to hear, there'll be another hearing, they think quite soon, this month in January, and they'll be looking for a release from Gradignan prison in Bordeaux, where they're currently serving their time at the minute.
I mean, after the conviction, we heard from her solicitor, who said it sent a very strong message. He said it's sent a strong signal to the men of this country, to the world of rugby, and to women too. Ladies, you are free to get drunk, to go out, to dress as you want. This freedom is priceless. We wanted to call it into question. You are not the cause of the danger, and that's kind of the essence of this case, and in many cases that are now coming before the courts, where we've seen cases where women have been obviously drunk or drank a lot, but that hasn't in this case in particular, that wasn't used to discredit the testimony that she gave.
No, and don't forget, it was coming at the time, if you remember, the Giselle Pellico trial.
Yeah.
Oh well, it wasn't her. Sorry, she was the victim. It was her husband, Dominique Pellico. He was 72, and basically he was drugging his wife and inviting men back that he was meeting online to come and have sex, as they thought, or that's what they claimed. They're having sex with this unconscious woman. They thought it was all part of a sex game. And of course, it turns out it all turns on consent. And again, this was the whole, I suppose, the crux of the case involving the rugby players as well. So, I mean, there's certainly a big swing in public opinion, and even, I suppose, probably, and that would include the judiciary as well, I imagine, and lawyers that, in France, that what might have been considered, a certain level of culpability on the part of a victim, that's just not entertained anymore. And it's no more than it would have been in this country at one stage, that it's literally victim blaming would have been kind of quite normal one time, it was, the crude version they were asking for it, was very much an excuse put forward. But I mean, the Giselle Pellico case is just an incredible case. That this went on for years, and the people who were convicted were everything from. There was a journalist. I remember I was going through. There was a whole list of pen pictures of these guys. They were from every walk of life, including convicted sex offenders, and then recent immigrants into the country, and all of this is just feeding into kind of the febrile nature of politics in France at the minute, and blaming foreigners for various things. But but it was a Frenchman, who was at the centre of all this, and again there was something like, I think it was 52. 52 defendants were ultimately. Were convicted. I think 17 are appealing of that. And so I suppose in a sense, the rugby players' rape trial is a smaller version, scaled down version, but like by any standards is a terrible case. And I mean, and there are echoes with other cases that we've seen, you know, like the phrase in France they use is stadium gods. So, you know, these are the guys who are kind of, you know, swanning into the local nightclub, the big fit guys, you know, pulling the ladies. And this is, you know, they're kind of been brought down to earth, that just because, you know, you're a top class rugby professional doesn't mean you can act any way you want towards anyone.
Yeah, and of course Denis Coulson was a very much a top-class rugby professional, like he was certainly at the top of his game.
Yeah, I mean, look, they were playing, it was top 14 rugby, which is it was the top professional division in France at the time. They were playing for Grenoble, you know, which were at that point were like a really, you know, they were kind of a second bottom half of the league table, but you know, it was the top flight French,
which is the biggest. I wouldn't be a rugby man.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's a big deal. Like, you know, to be playing in the top 14. You know, it's kind of you're playing teams certainly in the top 7 or the top 14 would be nearly all full internationals. So I mean, if you're playing in that league, you know, you've pretty much made it. I mean, the next level after that is Test rugby, as playing for Ireland or France or Australia, whoever.
But it's effectively like the Premier League in England in soccer terms. Like it is.
And it's a hugely commercially successful, you know, sporting division or sporting league, and even the second tier. Which we know that some of the guys like I think Jam and Farrell are still playing, or they certainly were up until the trial started.
Yeah,
and you know, and they were important members of their squad. They were weekly starters on their team. So, you know, it was a big deal in France. There was a lot of coverage of this trial. I mean, and there wasn't so much here. I remember there was a little bit of kind of social media criticism. Oh, why aren't the Irish, you know, covering this? And the answer to that is it's very difficult to do it. Like, you know, and I know another organisation. Let's say they did get a French speaking journalist out there. They had tried to use others, but weren't too happy with some of the quality of what they were getting. And it was kind of done at the last minute. Only. Because you can't, you know, it's just you want to get something right. You don't want to lose anything in translation, you know. And the fact that there is charges against somebody where there isn't an equivalent charge in this country, you know, you do have to be, in fairness to the defendants, as well as keeping in mind, you know, the experience of the victim. You need to be fair to all parties. So it's a tricky thing to report on. You know? It
is when you don't understand the complexities of the legal system and how the differences. Now, Chris Farrell, who was given a 4-year sentence with 2 years suspended, as you said, for failure to prevent a crime. I mean, he was even more than Coulson. He was even better known in the rugby world.
I know, yeah, he would he was capped 9 times for Ireland. You know, and he'd been playing for Grenoble and then had come back to Ireland. Was playing for Munster, and I think at that point he hadn't been charged. So, like, when the charges became apparent, he was cut from Munster. They let him go, and he went back to France, and he'd been playing with Onyx in the kind of the second tier professional division as one of his co-defendants. Although the co-defendant, I must say, was on a far more serious charge than him. I mean, Chris Farrell was on a relatively minor charge, and as he said, won't be going to jail. But like, he was absolutely well known. I mean, he was you know, he was an Ulster player as well. You know, he's from Tyrone. He played, I think, Clocker Valley would have been his original club. You know, like, you know, and as far as I understand it, I mean, he's very much he'd come from a tradition of and not being a drinker at all.
Yeah,
like, you know, and the fact that he was caught up, you know, I think it was mentioned in the court hearing that there was some of the other rugby players, they'd obviously gone on a tear, like a lot of the squad members, although Farrell, having broken his ankle, I don't think was one of them. And there was some kind of verbal shouting or roaring in the corridor, and the players woke up and doors were open and people went out to see what was going on. And then this incident then occurred with the woman that Denis Coulson had brought back, you know, from the nightclub. You know, and unfortunately there was a lot of drink involved, and you know, and judgment and consent and all these things went out the window. But yeah, I mean, it's a fall from grace. I mean, like Chris Farrell would have been on Six Nations squad. He was on a squad that went to a World Cup.
Yeah.
Like, he's a top class player. Yeah, like I've no doubt he's only 31. I'm sounding like a sports journalist now, but I've no doubt that he would have been in the shake-up, to play in the centre. He's a big guy, and a very good player. But I suppose, that doesn't matter. Under French law, he was deemed to have committed a crime, and that, he should have said, this is, according to French law, he should have put his hand up and done something to prevent the ongoing offence that was occurring. Again, his lawyers say it's very hard for him to know, consent wasn't involved at this point. But I suppose it's people have to use their common sense about these things. And I suppose, it's 2017. Everyone was a lot younger.
Yeah.
It's 7 years ago now. So, you're talking about, people in their early 20s. And I suppose that kind of common sense wouldn't be there. You do like to think that sports clubs, whether it's professional soccer clubs or rugby clubs, give some kind of training to young players. When you're in at whatever level. I'm sure there has been and there's a code of conduct that people are adhered to. It's in even in amateur clubs. In many sports. Whether you realise it or not, you've signed up to a code of conduct when you pay your membership of a sports club most of the time.
Yeah, and let's be realistic. Most people inherently know when something is wrong. It doesn't mean that they stop it, but a lot of people, whether they've been given lessons or codes of conduct, they will know. But unfortunately, we've seen in some of these sports trials and sports cases, and it's happened many times in the Premier League, people turn a blind eye because basically peer pressure. Now,
it's funny you mention, or it's interesting rather that you mention peer pressure, because that was one of the criticisms of the rugby players when they were suggesting that this has gone on too long and the case should have been dropped. And I think the reply from the prosecuting lawyers, well, if you hadn't acted like a rugby team all sticking together, you're not on the pitch anymore. And that was kind of the allegation there, that the guys were sticking to the story. They were still wearing the jersey, whatever it is, 7 years later, instead of, putting their hands up and saying, look, this is what happened. The evidence from from the young woman in terms of the impact it had on her was pretty heartrending as well. There was other people in the hotel, and they heard what they described as a guttural cry when and she was in the car park and was and she was in a terrible state. And and it was reported straight away. So it wasn't like kind of she thought about it and a couple of days later came back and realized, these are possibly, I might get some money. There was none of that. There was no question of any kind of ulterior motive in this woman. Making the claims of rape, the original allegations of rape, which has now been found to be true by a French court, and went straight to the police and made her statement, and has stuck to her story since pretty much day one. Yeah. And the part of the reason for the delay as well were the appeals by the players to try and get the case dropped, which of course they're entitled to do, and it went on for quite a number of years before it finally. I think it was December. It was over 2 weeks. It was supposed to go ahead originally in the summer, but Denis Coulson suffered serious injuries in a car crash, so it was put back. And of course, he was seen coming into court on French television, using a crutch and shuffling quite badly.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll come back to it when we hear these appeals and maybe try and get a sense of what's happening. Definitely very complicated legal system, but a stark case, I think, for sure.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Eamon.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.